Like the office they commemorate, presidential libraries are living institutions. Certainly it is my hope that the Reagan Library will become a dynamic intellectual forum where scholars interpret the past and policymakers debate the future.
Welcome to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute's virtual event series. To fulfill President Reagan's mission of making the Reagan Library a dynamic intellectual forum, our Center for Public Affairs programming offers lectures and forums presenting perspectives on important public policy issues of the day. Each year we bring you 20 to 30 events from politicians, authors, members of the media, business and military leaders, and more. During the 2020 closure of many businesses across our great country due to COVID-19, the Reagan Foundation switched to virtual programming to ensure that we were still delivering world-class content, even if you couldn't get to our hilltop to watch it in person. Now that the Reagan Library Museum is back open, we are holding hybrid programming, whereby some are in person and some are virtual. We hope you enjoyed this virtual event. In this week's Center for Public Affairs virtual event, we bring you David Rubenstein, best-selling author, businessman, and award-winning philanthropist. David Rubenstein is co-founder and co-chairman of the Carlyle Group, one of the world's largest and most successful private investment firms. In spring of 2020, David Rubenstein was going to join us at the Reagan Library for an in-person event for his new book, How to Lead. With the COVID closure, that event was not able to happen. With the recent release of his brand new book, The American Experiment, Dialogues on a Dream, we immediately reached out to book him for this virtual event. During today's conversation, David shares how the book is a compilation of some of our nation's greatest minds to explore the inspiring story of America, including conversations with Madeleine Albright on the American Immigrant, Ken Burns on war, Walter Isaacson on innovation, and Billie Jean King on sports, just to name a few. We now invite you to enjoy our virtual program with David Rubenstein, coming to you from our Leadership Academy Oval Office, joined in conversation by Reagan Foundation Institute Executive Director John Heubusch.
It is a real privilege to be with David Rubenstein this morning, the David Rubenstein who has written some remarkable books. I think this is your third, David, the American Experiment. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, a real terrific study of some Americans been successful across so many fields. And what I loved about the book, first, just to say, David, is it seems it's a synopsis of a number of the interviews that you have done in the past several years of these fine Americans. And I just have to say it was a real treat. But when I saw the title, The American Experiment, here we are as a nation 230 some odd years old. And yet you, the historian that you are, defined it to this day as an experiment. Why is that?
Well, the truth is, when the country was created, it was an experiment. There had never been a country created out of whole cloth this way. And the experiment that the founding fathers gave us was a representative democracy. Nobody really believed it could last very long. In fact, Thomas Jefferson, who was not at the Constitutional Convention, thought we should do it every 20 years. We should reinvent the country because he didn't think any country could live that long, or this government wouldn't live that long. And the truth is, we have lived for 230 years. And when you think about it, while we've had stress tests, the most obvious one is Civil War, we've survived all those things. And my theory is we have certain genes that are part of our body politic that make it possible for us to overcome these things. And really the story in the book is about how we've overcome some stress tests and how we've survived. We haven't yet achieved everything that the founding fathers wanted, but we've made a lot of progress, I would say.
Yeah. In fact, on the concept that you introduce in the front of the book, David, you talk about the 13 genes of America that you've identified. One of them was freedom. And I'd often wondered if it seems if you're a student of civics, one's view is often that with every right, for example, our Bill of Rights, there should really also come a responsibility or an obligation. And I wondered why the founders didn't create a Bill of Obligations or a Bill of Responsibilities right next to the Bill of Rights.
It's interesting. Nobody's really suggested that at the time, and maybe we should have. But as you probably know, at the Constitutional Convention, only at the last minute was it suggested there be a Bill of Rights, and James Madison, said, no, we don't need it because the states give you the rights in their constitutions. Later, to get the ratification done, it was recognized we probably need a Bill of Rights, and he helped to draft that Bill of Rights, but there's no responsibilities. You're correct. I guess their only responsibility is as a citizen, you should be a law-abiding type person, but we don't really have any responsibilities. You're correct.
Yeah, one of the concepts that you talk about, David, in the book is we are a nation of immigrants, no doubt about it. And I wonder, though, if you feel like in the modern day, at least the last decade, have we lost how we commonly as Americans define what it is to be an immigrant? And I say that in part because of the concern that upon many that we don't even have a southern border, and there's no difference now between what we might have called an illegal alien and an undocumented immigrant. There's semantics around that have just seemed to destroy the concept of what Americans have thought about as being an immigrant.
Well, our country initially said anybody can show up. And so in the early days of the country, anybody could show up. There were no passports and visas. Of course, we brought some people here who didn't come voluntarily, slaves. But if you leave that aside for a moment, people who came voluntarily didn't even need to register. You just showed up. Then clearly we began to change that. And in 1925, we had some real constraints of what it took to get into this country. And from 1925, 1965, we made it difficult to get into the country. From 65 on, we made it a little bit easier. However, what you suggest is correct. One thing is legal immigration. The other is illegal immigration. And some people have been upset that we have so many immigrants coming illegally, they kind of lump them together and they don't want any immigration. But if we don't have immigrants, we're not going to have bright young people who are really working hard. Many immigrants in this country are the people who build some of our greatest companies. And think about this, we have 46 million immigrants in this country right now. 46 million people are born elsewhere. 40 million are people who are the sons or daughters of immigrants. So the country has a large percentage of people who are from an immigrant population. Without that, I don't think we'd be able to do all the things we've done. But I do worry that the southern border has become so porous that we've lost the sense of what a legal immigrant is versus an illegal immigrant, and we've lumped them all together and we say we don't want any immigration.
Yeah, I know it can be a complex topic, and I'm not looking to get into politics here at all, David, but I just wonder, are you supportive, as we've seen historically over time in some respects, an interest on a nation's part, in this case the United States, of trying to attract those with particular skills in order to help the country grow versus, oh, you happen to have a familial relationship with the person, come on in. Do you have a view on that?
Well, the current immigration law does have both. In other words, it encourages people that have certain skills, intellectual skills or capabilities, and people that have relationships here. We get about 800,000 naturalized citizens a year. And as you know, you have to take a citizenship test to pass it. And many people pass it who study for that, though native-born Americans have a harder time passing that test when they're given it on kind of voluntary basis. But that's a separate issue. I do think that it is the case that we tend to attract very talented people now. And this is a very interesting phenomenon in terms of attracting people. Some of the most talented people in this country are people who came from abroad. It is said that 1/3 of the companies in Silicon Valley are run by people who are immigrants from India. And there's similar stories as well about other countries. So we need these people. And I think if we didn't have these people, we would be like most other countries, which you just have a relatively steady group of people, but they may not have the same initiative. The concept in the book that I talked about is the American dream is one of our genes. People are born in this country and often live up to the idea they can rise from nothing and come up to something great. And I believed in the American dream. And now it turns out many people in this country don't believe in it. The people that believe in it are ironically immigrants. They come to this country because they think they have a chance to live up to the American dream. Many people born in this country now don't believe it so much.
Yeah, just fascinating, as you say, that those that might come from outside of America seem to have, at least in the modern day, more confidence in the American dream than those born in America. It's somewhat of a sad state, I think.
Well, now you told me earlier that you're married to a woman who is from Italy, right? So
yes.
Is she an immigrant to this country?
She is a legal immigrant. She became a U.S. citizen just several years ago.
Okay, so she took a citizenship test and presumably she passed it. 91% of the people who take it pass because they study and so forth. Why did she come to the United States? Why didn't she go to France or Greece or Germany?
You know, she's from Sicily, and I'm sure you know something about the island of Sicily, but boy, was she looking for opportunity, because there's simply no opportunity there as far as she was concerned.
Well, that's what often people say when they come to the United States. It's a land of opportunity, and we've been willing to let people come in over the years, and some of our most famous entrepreneurs, and I write in the book about one person who rose up, who is Madeleine Albright. She was an immigrant, and she was one of the two immigrants that became Secretary of State. The other one was Henry Kissinger. And interestingly, in our Constitution, if you're an immigrant, you cannot be president of the United States, but you can have any other job. For some reason, the Founding Fathers were nervous that an immigrant might be loyal to the King of England or something, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. David, on the book, I think you have 27 interviews there. And this is not your only book. You've interviewed, I don't know, hundreds, perhaps thousands of people on your show on Bloomberg and PBS. It seems in some respects you have this incredible blessing because of your stature, your history. You can probably interview just about any person that you choose to. But at the same time, I wonder if it's a little bit of a curse, because it's probably difficult to determine when you write a book like this who to narrow it down to.
Yes. Well, I always like to say it was the publisher who took people out, because I did have another 20 interviews that I had ready to go into the book, and the publisher says, no, it can only be so many pages. So I've said to everybody who didn't get in the book and who I did interview, my publisher, it's too bad that publisher didn't want you in, but the next time I'll do it. It's a very difficult thing. And in fact, in this particular case, we thought we were going to put one or two people in, and some advanced publicity came out about these people being in the book. And then it turned out we didn't get them in the final version. So it's a little embarrassing. Sometimes somebody asks me to talk about somebody who's actually not in the book.
Yeah. I've written a couple of books for Simon and Schuster, and you're absolutely right. When you can, blame it on the publisher for sure.
You know, there's very few people you can blame something on these days without getting in trouble, but you can blame things on your publisher because they're used to it.
Yeah, that's right. January 6th, we'll start. Michael Beschloss, one that you interviewed in the book, and you have a great conversation with him about January 6th, the incredibly sad day. I'd like your take on the impact of that day. Nations around us, what is the impact on the world? How do they look at the United States as a result of that?
Now, as we talk today, we're just a few days past 9/11, and everybody remembers where they were on 9/11, just as everybody remembers where they were when President Kennedy was assassinated, or where they were when Ronald Reagan was shot. Everybody remembers that. People will always remember where they were on January the 6th, because almost everybody was watching TV and saw this riot that you couldn't believe. And the amazing thing about it is that people around the world were in more disbelief than we were, because around the world, people said, this is a banana republic kind of thing. How can this happen in the United States? How can the capital of the United States be invaded? It was the most stunning thing I've ever seen. And my jaw was open for hours as I was watching this. I regard it as what I call a stress test, a really big stress test of our democracy. And I dedicate the book to the public servants who protect our democracy. And I'm really largely referring to the judges. There were 65 lawsuits that were filed, and 65 lawsuits were thrown out of court. And that's because the only fraud in those lawsuits was the fraud in bringing those lawsuits, in my view. So while I admire some things that, all of our presidents have done, and President Trump did some things that I think, maybe you could say these are good ideas. In this particular case, I think it was a mistake to say the election was stolen. I recently was in a board meeting with somebody I'm on a board with Al Gore. We're on the board together, World Economic Forum. And I looked at him as I was thinking about it, and I said, wait a second, he lost that election by either one vote, one Supreme Court vote, or 534 votes in Florida, however you look at it. He never asked anybody to run to Washington to riot. He never said that the election was stolen. He just basically went forward with his life. And it was a sad situation, what happened on January the 6th. And it really made me think that tears were coming down the eyes of the Statue of Liberty, because here we believe in freedom and we believe in people exercising their right to vote. And here it was challenged in ways that I think was inappropriate.
Yeah. If there's one thing about that day, I guess it certainly proves the fact that we are still an American experiment, does it not?
Yes, and the experiment is one that, I can't imagine, for example, Ronald Reagan, had he lost an election and he ran for president, he ran for president 3 times, and 2 times he didn't make it. The 3rd time he did make it, and then he ran for re-election. When he lost, one time he was thinking of running in '68, didn't quite announce he was running, didn't quite run. And then, of course, in 1976, he didn't complain. He didn't get bitter. In fact, he actually embraced Gerald Ford in 1976. He didn't call him names or anything like that. He had an amiable ability about him that we sorely miss in politics today.
Yeah, we sure do. We do. You interviewed Ken Burns as another of your subjects, and how can you not watch a Ken Burns product and not be incredibly impressed? He's covered so many topics now. The one that you spoke to him about was his incredible documentary on the Vietnam War. I wonder, David, are you feeling now, as you did during the divisiveness in America over Vietnam, obviously 2 radically different situations, but is the nation at odds with itself in the same way?
I think it's much, much worse now. Now, it's a difficult contrast. We lost 58,000 men and women in Vietnam, so you can't compare those deaths with the internal skirmishing we're having now. But in Vietnam, I do think there were efforts to have bipartisan agreements from time to time. We still had legislation in the 1960s and 1970s that was bipartisan. Today in Washington, bipartisanship doesn't exist. Virtually any major bill will only have Democrats or only Republicans on it. Republicans if Trump is president, Democrats if Biden is president or Obama is president. It's a sad situation. When I worked on Capitol Hill in the 1970s, you had a lot of bipartisan legislation. I think the situation is actually much worse than it was in Vietnam. Now, in Vietnam, you're dealing with life and death issues every day, and it was very divisive. If you've lived through that period of time, you know it was awful for the country. But we did come together a bit afterwards. Now, though, I don't see anything that's going to bring us together anytime soon. Even an issue that should unite us, that everybody's going to deal with, the climate change, that isn't uniting us. And so many other things aren't uniting us. So I think that the reasons are money is much more important in politics than ever before. Social media is much more important. People are appealed to the left and the right to a greater degree than ever before. And I think people now are afraid of appearing to be bipartisan.
Yeah, I have a theory that it seems like in the modern day it's difficult for America to ever come together unless there's an incredibly terrible crisis, and that's the sad state of affairs.
So right now, I host a dinner every month, more or less, for members of Congress, where I interview a historian. My first book was about this. And these dinners are ones that members really like because nobody can see that they're meeting with somebody from the opposite party. There's no press there and nobody knows about it. And that's the kind of thing we don't have a lot of it in Washington now. When Ronald Reagan was president, he bitterly disagreed with Tip O'Neill on many substantive issues, but they would have a drink at night and they could be friends. And while they disagreed politically, they didn't regard each other as devils incarnate. But today, you kind of see this devil incarnate kind of view. It's a sad situation.
Yeah, it sure is. David McCullough, your interview of him on his book about the Wright brothers, what a great interview. And I've read about you previous to this and previous to reading your book that you're a cheerleader for the social sciences, and I almost could see you smiling as you're interviewing McCullough, because here it is, he's describing the Wright brothers as a couple of guys that didn't even graduate. I don't think they went to university, but they had a liberal arts education and figured this thing out called flight, right?
That's right. It's interesting. They didn't have any aeronautical degrees. They didn't have any college degrees. They didn't have any engineering background. They operated a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio. But David McCullough says what they had was they grew up with books. Their father had a lot of books in their house, and they were social science books, and they read them and they read them and they read them. And he would say that's how they succeeded when everybody else failed.
Just amazing. And I have to say, I've not yet read David McCullough's book, but I am going to, because in reading your interview with him, what an incredible movie I think that would make, the story of the Wright brothers.
Right. When you think about it, the Wright brothers were people that had no money. Basically, they spent about $1,000 to prove that men can fly and land safely. They did it when nobody could see them in Kitty Hawk. They had no public relations agents. And when they proved they could do it, nobody in the United States believed them. So they had to go to France to show people they could do it. And only when they were successful in France did they come back here. It's an incredible story, and David tells it with great enthusiasm. It's a really good book.
It really is. Judge Sotomayor, I've had a chance to meet her a couple of years ago, and you interviewed her. What a marvelous woman. And you talk with her about a topic really of central importance to you, and that's civics education. And in it, though, I don't know if it's part of the interview or not, but you've coined a phrase. Maybe I've just been ignorant of this, but you are interested in patriotic philanthropy. Do you own that space, David? I mean, who else is involved in this? And tell me why your interest in it.
I did coin the phrase, for better or worse. And what I meant by it is not that other kinds of philanthropy isn't patriotic, but I was trying to say patriotism that reminds people of the history and heritage of this country. And so I found when I bought historic documents like the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, and put them on display, it was letting people know more about our history. And then when I would fix up, let's say, Mount Vernon or Monticello or Montpelier or the Washington Monument, I was trying to get people to visit these sites again and have people learn more about our history, on the theory that if you don't know your history, you're likely to repeat the mistakes that we made in the past. So I have encouraged people that have signed the Giving Pledge, as I have, and others, to do more in this area. And it's an interesting phenomenon. 95% of the philanthropy that I am involved with, and I signed the Giving Pledge, I'm giving away all my money. 95% of my money goes to medical research and education and scholarships and so forth. 5% goes to what I call patriotic philanthropy, but it gets 100% of the attention, because if I give cancer research money, that's not news because everybody's doing that. But if I put up $10 million to fix the Washington Monument, all of a sudden people talk about it. So I know when I die, my obituary is going to say, he's the man who, saved the pandas, or he's the man who saved the Washington Monument, something which I didn't really do. But anyway, it's interesting. That's what I'm going to be remembered for, I suspect.
Yeah, well, I hope you have a lot of copycats, because it's just a marvelous, marvelous thing, and the nation hopefully thanks you for it every day it wakes up. So,
well, thank you very much.
David Blight, you spoke to him about his work. He is, I guess, the world's leading authority on Frederick Douglass, and I get the sense in it. You focus in on all of these various struggles, whether it's, you mentioned, I think, gay rights, women's rights, suffrage, the Vietnam War, civil rights, the immigration, Native Americans, and all the rest. That's the chapter that convinced me. I saw that as the American experiment. Here is a nation that is constantly struggling. It is a story of struggle, is it not?
It is. We have this rhetoric of Thomas Jefferson that all men are created equal. Is great rhetoric, but of course he wrote it when he was a slave owner, and it really what he meant was all white Christian property men are equal, more or less, I guess. But we have taken that rhetoric, though, and it was amplified really by Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, and we've said, well, that's actually what we should be like. We should have everybody equal opportunity, and so we've used this rhetoric of the Founding Fathers to give us a dream of where we can go towards, and we've been struggling to get there. So, for example, take sexual preference. There's a big chapter in there with about that fight. It was hard for me to remember this, but it was true that in the 1950s or 40s, and if you were gay, you could be fired for being gay, not for having engaged any gay act or anything, but just for being gay, you were fired and sometimes put in jail. I mean, it's just amazing that we've had these kind of situations, and obviously we've lived through the Civil Rights Revolution, and it's hard to believe that before 1964 there was no ability to have people eat wherever they wanted to eat or shop wherever they wanted to shop. It was an incredibly difficult environment in those situations. We haven't made it perfect yet, but clearly we made progress. And that struggle is one where many people gave their lives for this struggle, and many people, really fought hard to make these changes. And we still have ways to go, but we've made a lot of progress for sure.
Sure. Do you see an inherent conflict or a tension between this struggle for equality and capitalism?
Well, I put it this way. Capitalism, that word is not in the Declaration of Independence, and it's not in the Constitution. This is the economic construct that has made this country so successful economically. But interestingly, when people get wealthier and they see other people getting wealthier, they want to participate in it, and they want certain rights and freedoms. When you are just subsistence level, you don't really think about the rights you might want. You just want to stay alive. But when you realize you have enough money to stay alive, you want to get a better life. You want to be able to have rights to vote, the right to have whatever sexual preference you want, or not be racially discriminated against. So yes, the wealth of our country has made it such that people have time to think about the struggle for human rights, which we want in this country. In very, very poor countries, they're really worried about subsistence as opposed to all the things we now are worried about. And so I think capitalism has made it possible for us to worry about some of these things.
Yeah, I don't know, I can't recall if you interviewed him for this particular book, but I know I've watched you interview Warren Buffett.
Yes.
Before, and I have to, one of the most striking acts that I've seen in my lifetime was, I remember picking up the paper and reading that Warren Buffett had decided he was going to give away at least half of his accumulated wealth, give it to the Gates Foundation. And you're an expert who can answer this well for me. Normally, when you accumulate so much wealth, oftentimes there's pleasure in giving. There's also the fame one might achieve by their philanthropic acts and that sort of thing. And it seemed to me to be like one of the most selfless acts of any American in history to say that all of this hard work and wealth that I've earned, I am going to transfer the power, the authority, the ability to someone else who knows how to do it better than I. Was that not a remarkable thing?
Well, it was so stunning that Bill and Melinda Gates, when they were told about it, they broke down and cried. They couldn't believe that Warren Buffett was going to give them this amount of money and trust them to do it. And Warren, I asked Warren, did you want the foundation to be renamed the Gates Buffett Foundation? He said no. And so it was a really selfless act. And Warren Buffett, for most of his life, was not focused on philanthropy. But he realized as he got to a certain age, you got all this money, what's he going to do with it? Well, he doesn't really want to spend the time giving it away. He liked making the money. So he really gave it to people who enjoyed, as Bill and Melinda Gates do, giving away the money. So I thought it was a smart, clever kind of Warren Buffett kind of idea that maybe other people wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah. Wynton Marsalis, you interviewed him as well. An incredibly talented musician who he represents jazz in America today. I'm sure of that. There's a line that you quoted from him in which he's talking about Louis Armstrong, and he says, he was such a genius that you could lie about how great he was and still not be saying enough. I just thought that was, what an inventive thing to say.
Interestingly, he points out in the interview that at one point when he was growing up, he didn't admire Louis Armstrong.
Right.
He thought that Louis Armstrong was more or less an Uncle Tom type figure. But as he got to know Louis Armstrong, he realized how talented he was and how smart he was, and he really came to admire him. And the interesting thing about Wynton Marsalis is that he really thinks that jazz is really about life. And if you can understand jazz, you can understand life. And he's made it his life to educate people about jazz so they can get the same pleasure that he and his family have gotten out of it.
Yeah, something else. Of all of the people that you interviewed for this book, a number of them talk about passion, the concept of passion, and how important it is to success. I wonder do you feel that a passion for something is something that one develops from hard work, or is it simply discovered after repetition?
I don't think anybody comes out of the womb and says, I have a passion for this or that. I think you have life experiences. In my own case now, I'm very passionate about patriotic philanthropy, but I got to there in my 60s, not when I was in my 30s. So I think you evolve And finally, you find something in life that you really enjoy and you want to make it part of your being forever. So, in your own case, for example, what were you most passionate about when you were a teenager? And are those the same things you're passionate about now? In my case, I've changed and now I'm passionate about other things. And I now, because of the age I'm at, I'm 72, I realize if I'm going to be passionate about something, get something done, I got to do it quickly. So I'm racing to the finish line to get these things done before my brain collapses.
Yeah, I know. In fact, I read an interview with you in which I guess it was you just reached the age of 50 and you looked it up and it was like, oh, okay, well, the average white male lives to be 81 years old. The clock is ticking. Right. It's time to get going.
It's true. I mean, and let's be very serious about it. Many people don't live as long as you and I have lived. The average life expectancy in the United States is now roughly 80. But I would say that when people in 1900, if you were born in 1900, the life expectancy then was only 49. But at some point, this body that you've had your whole life, at some point, some part in it's going to say, I'm checking out. And from your own situation that some parts of the body may not work all the time, all the way you want, and you have medical issues. I don't know when my brain will kind of say, look, I just don't want to work anymore, so I'm going to check out. So I'm trying to get things done, as no doubt you are too.
Yeah. You've interviewed so many successful people. How important in your mind is humility to success?
Well, in a book I did on leadership, I said that humility is a great virtue. And I think great leaders have it. Now, we all know certain leaders that were arrogant, very arrogant, but they aren't the role models. I don't imagine that Napoleon was humble. I don't imagine that Caesar the Great, Alexander the Great was humble, or Julius Caesar was humble. But those aren't the role models. You want somebody like Nelson Mandela to be your role model. Somebody, and I would say Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was a person who had a good deal of humility about himself. He had self-confidence. He could make fun of himself. And I think when you have self-deprecating humor, as John Kennedy did as well, it means you have self-confidence, but you also have some humility. You got there by luck. And I think humility is a great virtue, which is unfortunately not one that many people have in the degree that I think they should.
Yeah, it's my favorite characteristic of someone that's reached the top. I very much agree. If I could, a few just biographical questions about you, David. How important were your parents, your family, growing up?
When you're growing up, you have the parents you have. So you kind of say, okay, these are going to be the people that are going to teach me how to do what I want to do, or they're going to prevent me from trying to do what I want to do. In my case, my parents were not college educated or high school educated. So they had very modest jobs. My father worked in the post office. He made $7,000 or $8,000 a year. But they gave me the thing that Warren Buffett has said, and I agree with. The most important thing you can get from your parents is unconditional love. Warren Buffett felt he had that from his parents. I felt I had it from my parents. As an only child, you tend to get unconditional love. And so whatever I would do, my mother would say it's pretty good. And so later on in life, as I was doing things that she really was proud of, she would tell me that. And that was one of the great pleasures of my life, is making your parents proud. So I tell people all the time, try to do something that makes your parents proud and honor your parents. As I tell people, it's a lot easier to honor them when they're alive than when they're not around. And so if your parents are alive, try to honor them and call them from time to time and tell them, what you're doing and try to make them part of your life. I think it's one of the great pleasures of my life until my parents passed away a few years ago.
Yeah, neat. You went to law school, became a lawyer, practiced law in a law firm, went on to work in a Senate committee on the Constitution. From there, you went to work for President Carter on the Domestic Policy Council staff. How is it with a career arc like that, David, that you just woke up one morning and said, that's it, I'm going to be interested in business?
Well, to be honest, it wasn't quite that way. I wasn't that good at some of the things I was doing. Your friend Ronald Reagan won the election against us in 1980, so I had to leave government. So my services in government weren't warranted or wanted. And then I went to practice law, and to be very serious about it, I wasn't a great lawyer. I was a reasonably good law school student, but not top of the class. I wasn't a Supreme Court clerk. And so I would have been a mediocre lawyer and nothing great. And I didn't enjoy it. And I tell young people all the time, you can only succeed at something really well if you love what you're doing. Nobody ever won a Nobel Prize hating what they do. You have to love it. And so I didn't love practicing law, and my clients didn't love my practicing law either because they didn't think I was that good either. So I basically decided to start a firm, and I got lucky. You know, most people that start firms, they don't really get anywhere. 99% of businesses fail. I got lucky. We made it work. I made a lot of money, and now I've decided to give back to society for my good fortune.
Well, okay, there's humility in spades. Now, but had you just been investing in a couple stocks on the side, or there had to be something that said to you in your mind, you know what, I'm pretty good at this? Or...
Well, I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't have any background in investing, but I had read about Bill Simon, who had been Secretary of the Treasury and done a leveraged buyout that was very successful. I said, why can't I find people that know how to do it, and I'll kind of do some legal work for them? But nobody really wanted to do that. So ultimately, I decided to start it, and I recruited people that knew something about it, and we got lucky. But I wasn't an investor. I have to say, I'm the person that raised the money, recruited the people, had the strategy. I hired people that actually knew the day-to-day nuts and bolts of how to invest. So I got credit for being a good investor. I really was not. And in fact, my next book is going to be about the art of investing. I've interviewed the greatest investors in the United States, and they're going to tell people how to really invest and how they did it. And I hope people will enjoy that book next year.
Okay, great. I'm going to read that one. All right, so you have a fabulously successful life in business, in philanthropy. Things are going along just fine, thank you. And the world must be a path to your doorstep with an interest in interviewing you. But yet you, in the position you are, have an interest in interviewing them. Now, where does that come from?
Well, what happened actually was when people would come to Carlisle events, they would be paid high speaking fees, former presidents or secretaries of state, and sometimes they weren't great speakers, and I was paying them a lot of money. So I thought, how can I make this more interesting? So I would start interviewing them, and I would make Ben Bernanke funny, I would make Hillary Clinton funny, and people seemed to like it. So I put that in the back of my head. Then Vernon Jordan said, why don't you become the president of the Economic Club of Washington? And I did that, and the same thing. I had speakers come in, they were boring, so I said, oh, let me interview them. And then Bloomberg saw it. And the reason I enjoy it is because you get to meet many different people, and you get to prepare, and you learn about people's lives. So you've obviously prepared for this interview. Well, in the course of doing it, you learn about something, and it's good. Now, when I was a young boy, my mother said, don't be a busybody. Don't ask all our guests in our house all these questions. I was always asking people questions. And so I just had a great intellectual curiosity about everything and anything. And so maybe it comes out. But also, I think to be a good interviewer, it requires some humility. Some bad interviewers are arrogant, and they try to tell people how brilliant they are before they get the chance to let the person answer the question. You don't want to dominate the interview by letting the interviewer do all the talking. And also, if you really are intellectually curious, it'll come out in the interview. And I think I am intellectually curious. I may have a lot of faults, but one thing is I am intellectually curious. And I guess maybe my mother would call it being a busybody.
Well, but you have a strength as an interviewer, David, that I really admire, and it is this, just as you just said. You, of course, understand who's the interviewer and who's being interviewed, but you meet with some of the most successful people, often involved in some of the most complicated things, and yet your questions are as simple as you'd ask a man on the street. Did you come up with that? How did you figure that out?
It's not something that just evolved. I mean, I'm always interested in things. And I always remember, Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain something in one sentence, you really don't understand it. So I try to ask people questions that I'm interested in, that I could understand about what they're doing, and try to make them relatively simple. I do try to intersperse humor from time to time. And, and I interviewed Oprah Winfrey. She said, I'm really not a great interviewer. She said, I'm a great listener. And she reminded me that great interviewers, they listen to what a person says, and then they play off of it. And then if you can use something humorous, I never make fun of anybody else. I make fun of myself typically. But it works out. It's a formula that, like, for example, in your life, you've obviously done a very good job running the Reagan Foundation, right? But you didn't go to school to think you were going to run the Reagan Foundation. But you've been there 12 years. So obviously you have a skill for it. You know how to do it. And there's something that, became natural to you. It's the same thing with interviewing me. It just kind of happened and it worked out.
Well, okay. So to segue from that, a few questions came to my mind as I was reading your book. And I'm going to put these to you very simply. Now, that might seem like odd questions, but I'm going to ask them anyways. Okay.
They could be called Rubenstein questions usually.
Okay, here comes some Rubenstein questions. What is more important to success, reading and listening or speaking and writing?
Well, that's a tough question. Nobody's ever asked me that before because I think you should have both of them. But most people do not do a lot of public speaking. So I tell people you should learn how to be a good public speaker for this reason. People are influenced, if you want to be a leader, by people who write something well that influences them or talk well. Ronald Reagan was a gifted communicator, the great communicator as he was known. He was a really good public speaker. Now, how did he get that way? It's because he practiced. He took every speaking engagement he could get. And the more and more you do it, you get to be better at it. So for years, I've taken every speaking engagement I can get, no matter who it was giving me the invitation, so I can learn how to speak. And now, I can make speeches without notes, and I have, ways of doing it as Ronald Reagan did. So I think learning how to speak is very effective, but learning how to read is one of the great pleasures of life. As you probably know, 14% of the people in this country are functionally illiterate. They can't read past the 4th grade level. And if you can't read, you're not likely to enjoy life, and you're not going to get the pleasure out of so much of what is out there. So I can't distinguish between the two. If I had only the ability to either read or be a public speaker, I suspect I would be a reader, because it improved my brain, but I'm not sure that would help society as much, because if you're a good public speaker, you can actually influence other people.
Yeah, well put. Okay. What's more important to success, curiosity or the power of observation?
Well, I think they are related in some ways. I mean, Walter Isaacson wrote a great book about Leonardo da Vinci, in which he says, how can anybody be as curious as Leonardo was? He was curious about everything, had intellectual curiosity. And so I think the powers of observation are kind of somewhat related. And so I think intellectual curiosity is a great thing. Being able to observe a lot is good too. So what is it about comedians that make them so funny? They observe the absurdities of life, and they kind of go back and kind of describe it. So I can't, again, distinguish between either of them. I think they're both interrelated and both very important.
Okay, I'll try a similar one. What's more important to success that you found, both in your own life and those you've interviewed, smarts or hard work?
Oh, no doubt about it, hard work. There are lots of smart people who are doing nothing these days. They were brilliant in school. Think about when you went to school, I don't know if you were first in your class, but whoever was first in your class, if it wasn't you, what happened to them? There were a lot of brilliant people I met in junior high school and high school, and some of them didn't amount to that much. It's hard work to get you everywhere. Nobody ever got anywhere just by basically just walking around and just not working hard. If you don't want to work hard, you're not going to get very far. You can say you don't want to work hard, okay, but you're not going to get very far. So there's no doubt hard work is much more important. And I've hired geniuses and I've fired geniuses. It's hard to manage a genius. I'd rather have somebody who's reasonably intelligent but is hardworking, not obsessively so, but so much so that they're going to put in the time to really learn a craft and make sure that they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, you probably have not fired a lot of hard workers. I don't know, but it just seems, yeah. Okay, hard work is on the list. What's the one other quality, if you could just choose one other quality you think important to success above and beyond hard work, what would it be?
Luck. Everybody has some luck, but you make your luck. If you sit in your house all day, you won't meet anybody. If you don't read anything, you won't learn anything. You have to make contacts and look for opportunities. So people who are successful, generally they're humble because they realize they had a contact that made an impression on them, or they found an opportunity that somebody opened the door for them, but they had their own luck many ways. And I think the luck is very important. But if you leave aside luck and leave aside hard work, I think the success really is due to the ability to get other people to follow you, because everybody is trying to convince other people to do something in the end, in politics and business, whatever. And you get that skill by learning how to communicate orally, learning how to write, but most importantly, leading a life that is one other people will say, he's an example of somebody I want to follow. Lead a life that others will follow, or do actions that others will follow you. And then people will do that. People follow other actions more than they follow anything else. Somebody they admire.
I'm going to have my kids watch this interview. Okay, David, how is it that people like yourself, and you're not alone, there are hundreds, tens of thousands, I'm sure, of individuals like this, that are remarkably successful not only in their tradecraft, but in innumerable other areas of life? It's almost as though they're able to live 10 different lifetimes at a single time. And you have mastered that. And how does that possible?
Well, I wouldn't say I've mastered. I would say most people who have a skill are probably good at one thing, and then they try other things. But sometimes I admit when I was younger, I would see somebody who was great in baseball, great in football, great in basketball, great in golf. They were more attractive to women and girls than I was. They were better scholars. But in the end, you have to focus on what interests you and what you can do the most with the talents that you have. And I think in the end, nobody is really great at everything. Nobody. And also, if you have no failures in your life, you're going to be in trouble. There were some people I knew when I was in government that they had these wonderful resumes that I would have lusted for, but they had never failed at anything. And when they finally met a roadblock in life, they couldn't deal with it. You have to have some failures in life, some setbacks, and that will make you stronger. So I've had some setbacks, and it made me stronger. And then again, I got lucky in many ways.
Do you practice or observe, some fundamental principles involving time management?
Well, I'm not good at time management because I basically work too much. I mean, time management is probably something that you should be better at than I am. But I do have a view that I try to do many different things, and then I try to allocate time. So today, for example, as we talk, I have interviewed already Christine Lagarde for my TV show. Tonight, I'll interview Justice Breyer for another TV show. I'm going to make a speech to Hong Kong tonight by Zoom. I'm going to make a speech to an investor conference. I was on Squawk Box this morning, and I'm going to do CNN later. And then, so I do many different things, but what you have to do is prepare. Jim Baker said to me, and his father had said to him, prior preparation prevents poor performance. Prior preparation prevents poor performance. And that always stuck with me. So every time I'm doing all these things I'm doing today or whenever I'm doing it, I always prepare and make sure I'm not just winging it, though it may appear to people watching this that I'm winging this interview, but I do as much as I could to prepare for it.
Okay.
As you obviously did. You prepared for this interview, I can see.
Well, I work for Elizabeth Dole, and it's like a tennis match. You better get up every morning ready to play your best game, or you're not going to cut it.
Well, she's a very talented Duke graduate.
Yeah, that's right. What figure in American history do you most admire?
In the end, the person who was the most impressive American, in my view, was Abraham Lincoln. He kept the country together. He freed the slaves, though later than many people wanted. And in the end, he had a sense of trying to bind the country together. And I think the terrible Reconstruction period of time would probably have been much better had he lived and not been assassinated. But holding the country together and giving people a role model and a person who could personify what democracy is and charity for all and malice towards none, nobody is in his league, in my view.
Yeah, well put. Well put. I think to this day he's routinely voted as the most admired American president for good reason. Yeah. What one or two books would you suggest that someone just getting their start, it doesn't matter, in business and sports and what, any field of endeavor, what book, I guess, most influenced you, or one that you would suggest is a must read for someone out there ready to, to achieve success?
It's a book that you're going to read and actually get through. So, it depends on what you're interested in. But I think the most important thing is to find a book that you actually read and want to learn from the book. So I tend to read a lot of books because I am doing interviews, and it force feeds me to read the books. So when you're doing an interview, you read the book. But I would say, in the end, the most important book that has ever been written in the English language, without doubt, is the Bible. And if you read the Bible, you're likely to learn lessons, you're likely to learn about history, and you're likely to be able to be more conversant on many subjects than any other one book that I can think of. So if I was in a deserted island and I had to be there for a year, I would take the Bible. If I couldn't do that, I would take my own books. No, I'm kidding. No,
Do you have a favorite historian?
well, again, it's like asking which of my children are my favorite, so I have to be careful. I am close to Doris Kearns Goodwin. I think she's really great. David McCullough is exceptional as well, in my view. They're two of the ones that I think not only are they great historians, but when you interview them, they have such an excitement about the subject matter, it leaps out at you. And you can't imagine how exciting it is to interview Doris Kearns Goodwin or David McCullough, because they're so wonderful at not only writing the books and doing the research, but explaining it. That's part of being a really good historian, is explaining it to people.
Yeah, they indeed have a passion. They do. Monuments. Given your patriotic philanthropy, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Is it okay to tear down monuments in order to make a point, shape the future? Is history something, regardless of what that history might stand for, should it be destroyed?
Well, interestingly, the pyramids are said to have been built by slaves. Maybe we should tear down the pyramids, but obviously that's tongue in cheek. The truth is, my view is that we should remember the good and bad of history. So I think if there's a monument to Robert E. Lee, why is there a monument to Robert E. Lee? Is it because he was a slave owner, or because he fought for the Confederacy in a lost cause, or because of his humility? What is it? What are you trying to do? In many cases, these Confederate monuments were built not to honor these people for what they did in fighting for the South, but they were built in the early part of the 20th century to basically be a pro-segregation, anti-black message. And in that case, I think it's not good. But like George Washington, he was a slave owner. Should we tear down the Washington Monument? No, he did many great things. That wasn't the most important part of his life. Same with Thomas Jefferson, wrote the Declaration of Independence, but a slave owner. So I think you have to take the good and the bad, but most importantly, explain to people why you're preserving it or why not. For example, take Stone Mountain. Stone Mountain is carved, it's a symbol of the Confederacy. Should we blow up the mountain? I don't think so. I think we should tell people when they go there, this is why they built it, and this is what the mistakes that some people made, but make sure we learn from the mistakes that people made.
Your book is called The American Experiment. There's also a term of art, Ronald Reagan spoke to it often, American exceptionalism. There is a view by many that America has indeed been blessed, as the song, as everything else says, God has blessed America. Do you believe that there's divine support for this unique country called the United States?
Well, that's a complicated subject, and I would just answer it really to say that America is a unique country. Nobody is rushing to leave this country to immigrate to China. Nobody's looking to leave to go immigrate to Russia. People are trying to get into this country, not leave this country. And it's an exceptional country. American exceptionalism, to some extent, means to some people that we should take what we have here and put it in other countries. Because we're so good at what we do, we can import it to Afghanistan or Iraq. And obviously, we've learned that's not that easy to do. But I do think that America is an unusual country. And what I say about it is that it's analogizing in the book to the planet. The planet itself came about in a very serendipitous way. Were we 10 million miles closer to the sun or 10 million miles further away, this planet wouldn't exist in terms of life being on it. The same thing is true. We have a lot of these qualities that came together to create the United States, and if 2 or 3 of them weren't there, or some other ones were there, we might not have this unique country. So I don't want to say we're better than any other country, but I know I wouldn't want to live in any other country.
Okay. Just a few more questions. I'll let you go, David. Would you still bet on America in what appears to be this evolving century of China?
Well, the United States has been the biggest economy in the world since 1870, and since World War II, we've been the dominant geopolitical, technological, military power, for sure. China, because of its population size, is rivaling us in the economic area and geopolitically. I think over the next 100 years or so, China is going to be our major competitor. There's no doubt about it. nobody else has the population or the other kinds of capabilities that they have. I would not bet against the United States for sure, but I think we have to recognize that China is a competitor to a great extent, and we have to recognize that and be prepared for that. That doesn't mean we can't have ways to cooperate, but if you go back through history, it's very rare that the two biggest economies in the world got along swimmingly all the time. There's always been competition. And Graham Allison, in his book, Thucydides' Challenge, deals with this problem of rising economies always kind of challenging the power that be and the conflicts that it has created. But right now we have a challenge with China that's going to go on for quite some time.
Yeah. I want to make my last few questions about philanthropy. I have no doubt it seems like the next 30, 40, 50 years of your life, David, will be about philanthropy.
Well, I hope I can live that long. I'm happy to live another couple of years even.
You've talked about how you have an interest in making transformative gifts. Define that for me.
A gift that will make a real difference. And let me describe my, I don't have the money of Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. They have staggering sums of money. And I encourage them and everybody else that has these staggering wealths, I mean, wealth of 50 billion or more, 100 billion or more, to start giving away that money in much larger sums. You know, if you're worth $100 billion and you give away $1 billion a year, that sounds great, but you know, you're not going to be around to see most of it given away. You got to give away much more. So in my case, I have 4 standards. 1, can I start something that wouldn't otherwise get started? 2, can I finish something that wouldn't otherwise get finished? 3, am I going to have an intellectual interest in it such that I'll stay involved and be more than just a check writer? And 4, am I likely to see some of the progress from my gift in my lifetime? Those are the standards I have. And you can have other standards. Those are the ones I use in sifting through requests. I don't have a foundation. I make all the decisions myself. I respond to all the inquiries that are serious ones myself. And I just do it that way because I want to be hands-on.
Neat. And I think the other points you make, in addition to gifts needing to be transformative, is that they need to happen now, right? And you would encourage this amongst all the philanthropists, right?
Do it now, and we can see the benefit of it. You know, the ancient pharaohs, they were buried with their wealth because they thought they needed it in the afterlife. There's no evidence you need that wealth in the afterlife. So, and maybe you'll go to heaven, and maybe you'll see what your executor's doing with the money, but most likely you're not probably going to be able to really know what the executor's doing so well. So do it now. Don't wait forever. Do it now.
Yeah. What gives you more satisfaction, succeeding in business or succeeding in giving?
Well, succeeding in giving is much more pleasurable. You know, my mother never called me up and said, David, I'm proud of all the money you made. But when I started giving her the money, she called me and said, David, I'm really proud of what you're doing. And when she passed away, the only thing she had in news clips about me were the ones about my gifts, nothing about my business success, because that's what she really thought was important in giving away the money. So it's much more pleasurable to think you're helping other people. What is it about humans that makes us different than other species on the face of the earth? It's that humans have a sense that they're willing to help people that are not just in their families or their tribes. They're willing to help other people. And it's what makes us so unique and so different than all the other species on the face of the earth.
What's the most important lesson you've learned in giving?
The most important lesson I've learned is that it's a great pleasure to give. And so you don't have people telling you, don't wait for people to thank you all the time. You're getting the pleasure by giving. And you shouldn't basically say, give me reports and thank me all the time. Don't give me celebrations or anything. Just remember, tell people you're getting a pleasure by giving the money. I've also learned, don't expect perfection in your gift. No gift is going to solve 100% of what you thought it was going to do in terms of a problem. Nothing works perfectly. And that the pleasure in giving should be more than enough. But if you want to solve a problem, get involved as well. Don't just write a check. Put your time in. I got involved in a lot of boards, and I think I can have more impact by giving my ideas and my time than just giving my money.
Yeah, well put. Last question, David. You talked about patriotic philanthropy, and you have the means to make a big difference in a number of places. What would you suggest the average American, the person of average wealth, how might they be patriotic from a philanthropic standpoint?
Well, remember, philanthropy is derived from an ancient Greek word that means loving humanity. It doesn't mean rich people writing checks. You can love humanity by volunteering. When de Tocqueville came here, he said, everybody in this country is too busy to talk to me. They're busy out volunteering. Volunteer, give your time. The time is your most valuable commodity. You can't make any more of it. So give your time. Find something that you're passionate about. If it's a neighborhood event or neighborhood or group, or it's a state group or city group, something you're passionate about that can make a difference, so that you can say when your time has come that, yes, I made a difference. My point of being on the place of the earth was justified. I did something to justify my presence on the face of the earth by doing something to help this person or that organization or that cause. That's going to be the greatest pleasure people are going to get from their lives.
Well put. David, just a marvelous book, and thank you so much for your time. It's just been terrific talking.
I appreciate somebody that's as well prepared as you are, and I'm always glad to look at the Oval Office. It reminds me of my youth when my hair was dark. So congratulations on the great job you've done for the Reagan Foundation and Reagan Library, okay?
Thank you, David. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's virtual programming event. We hope this conversation has inspired you to share what you've learned with your family and friends, and that you'll join us again for an upcoming event.
And let me offer lesson number 1 about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.